All right, hello everybody. Welcome to Episode 8 of Chatting Cinema. Today we're going to be talking about some small budget filmmaking and what that means in Hollywood, and some of our, I guess, some just small budget films that we've thought of.
Yeah, favorite ones that come to mind,
Yeah.
sort of talking about what that entails,
Yeah.
making a film with a small budget.
I'm Gianni.
I'm Flynn.
We're also going to talk today about Knives Out. We'll get into spoilers, but we'll definitely warn you when we're
Yep.
getting to that point. And then we're also going to give our first impressions on The Mandalorian on Disney+.
Yep.
So let's get right into it. Yeah.
Yeah, so starting with small budget, I mean, a lot of, some of the best movies of the year, every year, end up being the smaller budget movies. Because when you think about independent film, that's a lot of times where some of the best films come from. And usually they're working with smaller studios or have to get backing other ways and don't really have like that big established studio backing to help them pay for their movie and pay for everything they need.
Yeah.
So one that came to mind, one of my favorite movies is Whiplash, directed by Damien Chazelle. It was a short film at first, and then Damien made it a feature-length film with Miles Teller. And Whiplash is so good. It's filled with so much effective tension, so many great performances, and the thing about it is it's set in smaller locations, classrooms or houses, things of that nature. And it's really performance driven, so you don't have to infuse it with that big budget. And I think that, again, speaking on why some of the best movies of the year are typically smaller budget films, is because sometimes you rely on those performances, and that's when you get the strongest work out of actors, is when they're carrying the movies. I mean, The Lighthouse this year was another one where you're on location, you're in one setting for the entirety of the movie, not counting the boat that they take to get to the lighthouse and the island. And it's all Robert Pattinson and Willem Dafoe. And, it's slow burning, it's character driven, and that makes for a great movie.
Yeah. One of my favorites, made on a small, kind of really shoestring budget, is The Florida Project, directed by Sean Baker, starring Willem Dafoe, so he's also in The
Yeah.
Lighthouse. And yeah, it was made on a $2 million budget, so, I mean, really, they had to cut so many corners.
Right.
But Sean Baker has really made a name for himself by making low-budget films, and I'm sure, studios love that.
Yeah, for sure.
And A24 has been such a supporter, a strong supporter of low-budget filmmaking and indie filmmakers. And Sean Baker made a name for himself with Tangerine, which was shot entirely on iPhone 5s, which is that's insane to me.
Yeah.
And yeah, so many movies, often I feel like they become more popular also, and they're seen more if people hear that, oh, this was made with no money. you know?
Right.
People kind of are interested by that, to see what was made. We were talking kind of off camera about other films, like Get Out surprised me that was made on such a small budget, $4.5 million.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, Jordan Peele, being able to that was his directorial debut.
Right.
And people, I remember the first trailer came out, and we were all thinking oh, this looks good.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and you think about Jordan Peele, I mean, it's hard to imagine now with how he's established himself as a filmmaker, but coming off Key and Peele and the sketch comedy that he did, at least in the mainstream zeitgeist, Jordan Peele was sort of thought of as one thing. So it's not hard to believe, and I believe Blumhouse produced Get Out, but it's not hard to believe that a studio wouldn't cut the biggest check for Jordan Peele when he says, look, I want to do this horror movie, even if he, turns in a strong pitch and script and whatever. It's not completely out of the realm of possibility when you're thinking about that place and time that a studio wouldn't say, hey, let's break the bank taking this risk on somebody who's known as a comedian. Because I know, like you mentioned when the trailer came out, that's why it was surprising to so many people that it looked so good, because Jordan Peele was one thing to a lot of people. And he turned around with Get Out and turned in something great. And I mean, Moonlight, also speaking to the A24, the independent film, not a huge cast of characters, story told in 3 parts, not crazy on like settings or anything like that. Like very like easy places to find filming locations for. And Moonlight's one of the best films of the decade.
Yeah.
It's a Best Picture winner. And I think that sometimes, like, when you have these low-budget pictures, it forces you to get creative and think outside the box. Again, one that we were sort of discussing off-camera is the original Star Wars film.
Yeah.
You don't really think of Star Wars when you think of low budget. But forcing people to get creative sometimes yields the best results. If you think about that original Star Wars movie, like there's so much model work, there's so much like matte paintings, so many matte paintings that serve as settings and serve as like a space location, something like that. You think of Luke Skywalker's lightsaber from that movie is part of a camera. It's called a Graflex. And they kind of just took that part and put rubberized grips on it, and you know they're mixing animal sounds to make the sounds for like TIE fighters and things like that, and because they don't have necessarily all the money in the world to use these things, and obviously when you talk about the original Star Wars, part of the creativity comes from the limitations of the time, as far as effects work go, but part of it for sure is not having that ridiculous amount of money you need to do some of these things.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think when people think of a low budget film, the first thing that comes to their mind is like a horror movie.
Right.
You know, a lot of horror movies even today are still made with just not a lot of money.
Mm-hmm.
And but they don't think that like a hard hitting drama
Right.
can also be made on a really small budget and work really well. You know, and we mentioned indie films earlier, and there's so many that are out there that were made on, you know, really small budgets, like $1.5 million for Submarine.
Yeah.
Things like that. So many out there.
Yeah, A24 has been, you know, such a godsend as
Yeah.
far as independent film, and it's sort of mind-boggling to think about all the films that have been produced by A24 in the past few years
Yeah.
that are just like, I mean, in my opinion, like instant classics.
Right.
Like films like Lady Bird. Like, I don't know what I'd do without A24. They make some of my favorite movies every year. And touching on the horror movies, it's interesting because that can sort of show the downside of low-budget filmmaking when you're sort of taking advantage of that system. So, like, I think that a lot of mainstream horror movies come out every year. Think like the original Unfriended, movies like that. Where studios kind of like sit back and go, okay, we can take a couple $1 million, hire some, you know, college-aged, maybe a little older actors that don't necessarily have any exposure, aren't really in a place where they can bargain for a higher salary, pay them as low as we can, shoot it in a house, add some effects, and then sort of ship it out the weekend of Halloween, make $50 million on opening weekend, and then that's that. And you don't put any creativity into the process. Mm-hmm. Like, I think the original Paranormal Activity is a fine example of a good movie using that creativity and a low budget, because there's nothing real, like, you don't have to pay for like any expensive effects. There's no character work. The actors should be unknown because it's supposed to be real people. And
Yeah.
Blair Witch Project is another one where like it's supposed to be real people, not actors. It's supposed to be found footage. But then you look at like sequels to films like this and films that are inspired by this, and it almost lacks that creativity that we've been talking about that sort of makes low budget independent films so good.
Yeah, and it's funny that in movies like Paranormal Activity and Blair Witch, like you have the actors holding the camera a lot of the times,
Yeah.
so you already eliminate the cost of a cinematographer.
Right.
Anyway, a film that was made on a really shoestring budget, directed by Rian Johnson, is Brick, kind of the neo-noir film starring Joseph Gordon-Levitt.
Yeah.
Which have you seen it?
Yes, I have,
Okay,
yeah.
It's, I think, like the first time I saw that, I watched it right before The Last Jedi came out.
Yeah.
And I wasn't expecting it to be what it was. Like this kid's in high school, and the dialogue it could be written for like 40-year-old
Right.
detectives and you know, murderers. But again, it's a mystery, and I think Rian Johnson really excels in this realm of writing great dialogue.
Right.
And he did it again with Knives Out,
He
which
certainly
just
did.
came out. But Brick was made on $500,000. Like,
Yeah,
that's crazy.
And you think like anybody listening that thinks like $500,000, $1 million, $2 million, $4 million. These are still exorbitant amount of money.
Sure, yeah.
But a lot of people don't think about the cost of a film and how much, like $500,000 is nothing when you think about all the people you have to pay, all the equipment you have to get, all the location scouting you have to do, and that's not even taking into consideration like an advertising budget and getting the word out there about your movie. So I mean, this is you're basically making it on no money at all and hoping that it works out. And in Rian Johnson's case, it's so nice that it did because I think that opened more doors for him as far as the movies he can make. Because he made Looper a couple years ago, well, a few years ago now. It came out a while ago, with Joseph Gordon-Levitt, and it just kind of shows like that creativity he has. And that's another nice thing about sort of shoestring budget filmmaking is you kind of show off what you can do with only a little money, and then studios start to take notice and say, okay, well, what if we gave you more money and see what to do with this? Like Get Out, we see Jordan Peele just knock it out of the park with that, with his directorial debut, and then he follows it up with Us.
Yeah.
And he has Monkey Paw Productions, and Blumhouse is so excited to have this partnership with a filmmaker like Jordan Peele. He was handed, the Twilight Zone reboot. Like, it's pretty cool to think about like what can come from a small budget independent film.
Yeah, and I think for directors, I think it's really important to kind of start out that way too.
Yeah.
Because you are forced to really think outside the box, like you were saying earlier. And then when you're given a bigger budget, you can get movies like Us. You know what I mean? Taika Waititi is another director who started out making really small budget films, like The Hunt for the Wilder People.
Mm-hmm.
I remember an interview when Thor Ragnarok was making the rounds and they were doing the press for that. He said that, he went from making Hunt for the Wilder People, where he was like cutting fruit and cheese for people on set, to having like a full catering team on Thor Ragnarok, which is just, the luxury that comes with it too.
And he had What We Do in the Shadows as well, which is found footage. It's only a few characters taking place in a house, like very low budget, but still, so funny, so great, and super creative. Like if you think about making What We Do in the Shadows, for anybody who hasn't seen it, is a found footage movie about a group of vampires living together in a house. It's hilarious.
Like
Taika
The
Waititi
Office with vampires.
Yeah, basically, Taika does such a good job, and I think that it's more on people's radar now, after Ragnarok and whatnot. But when you think of making a movie with like vampires or a monster movie, you kind of think of like heavy effects work and things like that. But it's such an effective communication of who these vampires are, and it's so funny, and you never for a second believe they aren't vampires. And there's a scene where they encounter a group of werewolves, and they're just like going back and forth with the dialogue, and the werewolves are in their human form and they're sort of howling. But again, speaking to the creativity, like this is such a creative way of communicating who these characters are, and what they're supposed to be without necessarily having to show people it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, low budget filmmaking is really great. Definitely support them when they come out.
For sure.
And, they're important. We don't need all of the movies to be made with huge budgets, right? So moving on into Knives Out. We mentioned Rian Johnson a few minutes ago. This was directed and written by him. This is a star-studded cast.
Yeah.
I mean, Daniel Craig, Chris Evans, Ana de Armas, Jamie Lee Curtis, Toni Collette, just to name a few. And yeah, we both saw it. This is a great movie.
Yeah, this is phenomenal. I thought to myself after it ended that it could be my favorite movie of the year. So good. Speaking of that star-studded cast, like this is how you use a star-studded cast.
Yeah.
Everybody, I mean, feels like they're having the time of their lives making this movie. Everybody has their distinct like character. And it really does feel like a game of Clue in that sense. Like everybody has their thing. Like Toni Collette is the beauty guru that is kind of a fraud, and Michael Shannon owns the publishing company that his father helps run the publishing company that his father's books are published on, and he feels like he's living in his father's shadow and doesn't really know what he's doing. Chris Evans is so good in this movie. He's the patriarch of the family's grandson. He goes by Ransom.
Yep.
And he's just kind of like the typical like jerk, like doesn't really have anything going for him, but he's still rich because of the family money. So he's just kind of like living his life the way he wants to live it, with no cares and no responsibilities. Like everybody has such a great, distinct character, and everybody's really good in this movie.
Yeah, absolutely. Before we get into plot, I just wanted to talk. We mentioned kind of off camera about how some of these actors are really playing against their type.
Yeah.
Like Daniel Craig, he's James Bond.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And we see him play this really funny,
Yeah.
over the top, Southern eccentric investigator, private detective.
Yeah.
Is that what
yeah,
he is?
Yeah, I guess so, yeah. Benoit Blanc.
Benoit Blanc, yeah. And he totally carries the film, as does everyone else.
Yeah.
It's such an ensemble movie, and everyone really works together in every scene. And I think that's why it is so effective.
Yeah, it's so nice when you have an ensemble cast like that where
Yeah.
everybody still has their moments
Yeah.
to shine. Like towards the beginning of the movie, after the father of the family, played by Christopher Plummer, is found dead, every member of the family kind of gets interviewed mostly by Lakeith Stanfield, who's a member of the police department, with Daniel Craig's Benoit Blanc sitting in the background and kind of listening in. But that's such an effective way to introduce us to who these characters are and allow everybody to get their own like individual moments. So then when the film is like playing with this big cast and everybody's sort of in scenes together, you know exactly who Toni Collette is, and you know exactly who Jamie Lee Curtis is. And that's so it just goes to show that Rian Johnson really knows what he's doing. I know that Agatha Christie murder mysteries, these types of stories have really been a big influence on him and have really inspired him. And it feels like such a love letter to that, but also its own thing, which is a hard balance to strike.
Yeah, definitely. And we should probably give a little spoiler warning
For
now,
sure,
because we're about to get into spoilers. So if you haven't seen Knives Out, definitely go out and see it. It's worth a watch. Go with a crowd. Bring your family. It's a lot of fun. But in the first few minutes of the film, like you were just mentioning, we get to see every character introduced.
Yeah.
And I love that we get all of their accounts of the night before, leading up to the death of Harlan Thrombey. And you kind of really don't know, because everyone has something to lose, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Like, so everyone has a reason to lie. And I think that was really interesting and really well executed, that no one is innocent.
Yeah,
You know
it's
what I
so
mean?
good. And that's such like the game of Clue like aspect of the movie where, Toni Collette's beauty guru is sort of double dipping from the family money and paying for her daughter's college, and also taking money for herself. Michael Shannon is about to lose the publishing company. It's just so many things. Like everybody sort of has effective motive, but it's interesting because the death initially of Harlan Thrombey, the death is thought of as a suicide. And Lakeith Stanfield's police officer is kind of like going through these motives, but because of the way that the accounts are given, nobody sort of seems like a suspect until Benoit Blanc kind of breaks it down.
Yeah.
And shows why everybody has clear motive to do this.
Yeah, I love that Benoit Blanc, too, in those first couple of scenes, he's just silent in the background.
Yeah.
And every time he hears a lie, he presses the piano. That was so cool. But Lakeith Stanfield's character in the film, from the get-go, is convinced that this is open and shut, this is a suicide. But yeah, it was interesting to see how they kind of unfolded that, oh no, there's more to this.
Yeah.
Anna de Armas's character in the film, she plays sort of the housekeeper.
For the
family.
nurse.
I'm sorry. Yeah. Ooh. Yeah, she's Harlan Thrombey's nurse.
Yeah.
She's his best friend. And I really like that window too into
Yeah.
Harlan Thrombey's character,
Yeah,
because
for sure.
I think that was a heartbreaking death, really, that
Yeah.
he didn't know that he wasn't poisoned.
Yeah, it's so
No.
interesting. There's a great moment in the film when the family sort of all gathers for the will reading.
Yeah.
And you find out that all of Harlan Thrombey's fortune is going to Anna de Armas's character, Marta, and it's so fascinating because you think of like family and the money would go to the family, but it really makes sense when you get this insight into Harlan Thrombey's character that this is sort of the one person that genuinely cared about him.
Yeah.
Like you see everybody's relationship with their father or grandfather in some cases in this movie, and they're all like strained and kind of abusive in a sense, really taking advantage of him. And they've kind of gotten like everything they could possibly need from him already, and they just like keep sort of bleeding him dry in this sense. And Marta is the one person in his life that really doesn't care about the money, doesn't care about who he is in that sense, and just truly enjoys him as a person and as a friend, as a person. And it's so interesting the way they display that grief, because it feels like she's the only one that is genuinely grieving throughout the first bit of the movie.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's really interesting the way that we see his character, that arc of deciding that he's going to cut off all of his children.
Right.
And for good reason,
Yeah.
too, because like
Yeah.
you said, they're all kind of like the villains of the
Yeah.
film. But yeah, I just keep thinking about when they realize that Ransom switched the bottles, that Marta really did do it correctly.
Right.
She had the right medicine for
Yeah.
him, and it wasn't morphine.
Yes.
Um,
Like 100 milligrams of morphine she thought she injected into him when the correct dosage was 3.
Yeah.
So she believes that he has 10 minutes to live.
Yeah.
So it is actually a suicide.
Yeah.
I thought that was such a fun twist.
Yeah.
Because the whole time you're sort of like thinking that it's a murder, and we sort of discussed this off camera that really like halfway through the film you kind of get this scene of what happened, at least what Marta thinks happened. So she thinks she injected Harlan with 100 milligrams of morphine. She tells him that he may die, like he's going to die in 10 minutes. So he decides to sort of spin this web, gives her, instructions on what to do to make it seem like somebody else killed him so that she doesn't go down for this. And like you said, she didn't actually give him the morphine, and he does in fact commit suicide unnecessarily, because he would have lived if she could have called an ambulance like she wanted to.
Right.
So that's the kind of like one of the twists of the knife that you get in the plot, where it really is a suicide. You're wondering, you're going into the movie thinking who murdered Harlan Thrombey. And the answer is that nobody did. He killed himself. And that was something that I really wasn't expecting.
Yeah. And it was really interesting to see, like, okay, so he didn't kill himself. Then who did orchestrate all of this?
Right.
And did you think it was Ransom?
No.
No.
So, like, there's after the will reading and after Marta gets, kind of knows that she's getting all the money and stuff, Ransom takes her away and sort of goes through how to beat this. He gets, her version of the events, and sort of like tries to formulate a plan, like, okay, how are we going to do this? And I bought it.
Me too.
Like, I bought his interactions with her. It made perfect sense. In that moment, I kind of just thought, oh, well, okay, he's just being manipulative. This is kind of his character. He's, figuring this out for himself. And it makes sense because in the will reading scene, Ransom is, kind of laughing at the fact that none of his family members are getting anything.
Yeah.
So that moment makes sense when he's trying to help Marta, because it just seems like, okay, he's just trying to stick it to his family again, and make sure they still don't get anything.
Right, absolutely. Yeah, and I think I agree with you. I really bought all of their interactions.
Yeah.
I mean, right after the will reading, when the family really turns on Marta, they go from saying like, "Oh, we really wanted you at the funeral.
Yeah.
And don't worry, we'll give you money.
Right.
We'll support you." and then immediately they turn on her and they snap.
There were
And
so many great like little
Yeah.
character moments like that.
Yeah.
Like, I think that at least maybe 4 characters say to Marta, "We really wanted you at the funeral. I was
Yeah.
outvoted."
Right.
So
Would
you're
we
kind
consider you a part of this family?
yeah. So you're kind of like, okay, well, clearly nobody actually wanted her at the funeral. Like, nobody outvoted anybody. And each time a different character starts describing Marta, they say that her family is from a different country. So that it's such a good portrayal of like an out of touch, like old money family that has never really like wanted for anything.
Yeah, and the thing about Marta in this film is that she is the heart of the film.
Yeah.
I would say Marta and Harlan Thrombey.
Yeah.
But specifically Marta, she is the only good person here.
Yeah.
And that's what Benoit Blanc says at the end of the film, that like you're a good person, you know? And I think that that's, to me, also kind of heartbreaking too, that she's there for this family and that she probably would do anything for them.
Right.
And they can just turn on her in an instant, you know?
On a dime.
It's all about money. Chris Evans having the time of his life in this role.
Yeah.
We mentioned that it wasn't really so much of a play against type for him because he's played kind of that jerk before in other films. But I would say that we've gotten so accustomed to seeing him as Captain America now. And he's done some other things too, like Gifted, but that was kind of a drama, and he was still like the good guy.
Yeah, Snowpiercer.
Snowpiercer, he directed a film too, in the meantime, a romantic comedy, Before We Go.
Right.
So this was interesting to see him kind of go back and play this character.
It's cool too because, you know, I remember leading up to like Infinity War and Endgame, every interview with Chris Evans kind of seemed like I love playing Cap and this is great, but I want to do more things.
Yeah.
And this movie just kind of like flat out shows like this is why. Like he doesn't have to be limited to one thing in people's mind to, you know, sort of, and I know he wants to direct more and wants to stretch out, and like I can't imagine like not getting him as this character. He's so good. He's so much fun. And he has some complexities to him.
Yeah.
He's the jerk, but he kind of, in the end, is the one that sort of orchestrated this whole plan to, you know, once he finds out that he's not getting any inheritance. So he's kind of like a diabolical mastermind on top of like being this jerk that people kind of think doesn't know a thing and just only cares about himself, figures out this whole system and then in the end gets outplayed because of kindness. I think that's so good. Like, you know, it's a weird movie to think about like the good guys winning at the end, but the best character, like you were saying, the heart of the movie, ends up with the happy ending.
Yeah, definitely. I think that ending shot of Marta standing on the balcony looking down at the family is probably one of the best shots of the year.
Yeah,
you know?
for sure.
And so many films this year and a lot of media that's coming out is all about love.
Yeah.
I mean, we mentioned some other ones like Ford v. Ferrari and Jojo Rabbit, things like that. Movies like that are all made and about love.
Yeah.
Another thing that I think is shaping up that way is The Mandalorian on Disney+. What do you think of the first 4 episodes?
I love The Mandalorian. So I've now that we're 4 episodes in, which is the halfway mark of the season, I've seen some people say they feel like not a lot has happened so far. I've seen some complaints that people can't figure out what the plot is, but I don't feel that at all.
Yeah.
It's really good as a Star Wars property, and it's really good on its own. Like, The Mandalorian is shaping up to be such an interesting character, because when you think of Star Wars bounty hunters, especially like in the main series films, you don't really get a sense of like, I don't know, like a heart in them.
Right.
It's they're cold, they're ruthless. Like, you know, Boba Fett doesn't really have a character in the original trilogy. He's just there as a bounty hunter. There's not really any complexity to him as he's originally portrayed. And then the prequels decide to introduce Jango Fett, his father, and kind of give Boba's backstory, which adds to who his character is. But you just see how cold bounty hunters typically are. Like Jango Fett in the beginning of Attack of the Clones sends a different bounty hunter, Zam Vessel, on this mission to kill Senator Amidala. And then when he's about to be given up, he just kills her with no remorse. So that's typically the bounty hunter we see. So I love turning that on its head with this Mandalorian, who, like, time and time again has kind of, like, said that he lives by this code and has to do certain things, and then turns away from it because of his heart and who he is.
Right. Suddenly a child comes into his life.
His morality.
And now he's on the run.
Yeah.
You know? And I think that's so interesting. And I totally agree with you about the Mandalorian as a character. And I love that in these first 4 episodes, we don't know a whole lot about him, but at the same time we do.
Yeah.
You know, and we're so invested in him.
Yeah.
Episode 4, which is the most recent episode, we see his helmet come off.
Yeah.
We don't see his face, but still, that's a big character moment to me. And I love everything they did on the most recent planet, which does not have a name. Right?
I don't believe so. If it does, I can't remember it.
Yeah. I really liked this episode, directed by Bryce Dallas Howard.
Yeah.
Done really well. And we just, Baby Yoda, the child, whatever you want to call him or
so
her.
Good.
It's so cute.
Yeah.
Just the production design of the show is so impressive. Every episode is just bleeding with beauty,
right?
You know? And the score is really great.
Yeah, done by Ludwig Göransson, who did Black Panther. That score's phenomenal.
Yeah,
it's such a good job. And the child, it's so good. Such a great design and such a great surprise for this show, which has really been. I don't know what I expected out of The Mandalorian, but I feel like what we've gotten isn't what I expected.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I'm really loving it.
Yeah.
They've done the same fake out child death twice now, because you hear blaster fire and you don't necessarily see where it went, but the last time you see a blaster pointed, it's at the child. They've done that same fake out death moment twice, and it has gotten me both times.
Me too.
Which is crazy. And you don't think about necessarily them killing off this character, but at the same time, the season has been wrapped, and Disney, I mean, I can only assume, knew that people would kind of fall in love with the child, but I don't know that they'd know it would be this popular.
Yeah.
So you don't know if it could end up dying or because we haven't seen it in the sequel trilogy yet,
right.
And you kind of find out that the child is force sensitive, is clearly being targeted by people, clearly has some sort of significance that we don't yet know about, whether it's a clone, right. We don't know.
Yeah.
So I'm nervous. I don't want to lose it.
No, neither
I don't want to lose the child.
Yeah, and I totally agree with you about not really knowing the child's fate. Because for a second, too, in episode 4, I was thinking, oh, he is going to leave it on this planet.
Same, yes.
Okay, goodbye. And I wasn't ready for that,
Yeah.
you know? But another thing I wanted to mention about the Mandalorian specifically is that he feels so vulnerable. He gets beat up in this show, and I love that. I love that he's not invincible, you know? That makes him such more of a compelling character and a protagonist, too. And I feel like I'm always rooting for him because of that, because he is so, breakable.
Yeah, I completely agree. They found a way to make him so likable and sort of add to the complexities with like we talked about with this character with the morality. And I mean, he has to sort of turn in the child for the bounty, but then doubles back and takes it back and is chopping down his fellow bounty hunters to protect this kid that he has. Another interesting thing about The Mandalorian that I've been enjoying actually is the weekly episode release.
Yeah.
I didn't think I would. I was pretty upset when Disney Plus launched and I knew that I wasn't going to be able to watch the whole thing right away because I just wanted to. And The Mandalorian's episodes are 30 to 40 minutes for each episode. So when I watched that first episode, all I wanted was more. I wanted to watch the entire series right there. But the way they've been able to sustain excitement and discussion and conversation about the show through these weekly releases, I think has been so brilliant.
Yeah.
And it's something that I didn't realize I was missing because Netflix has, the binge, and that's how I've consumed TV for so long now, that going back to like appointment-based television and sort of knowing like, okay, every Friday night I get to watch The Mandalorian, I get to look forward to this new episode, has been such an underrated part of it, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think Disney has a real hit on their hands here with The Mandalorian. Honestly, for me, it's a contender for like best show on TV, at least currently.
Yeah.
I think Dave Filoni and Jon Favreau are doing a great job as the showrunners. And Dave Filoni, this is his directorial debut with live action.
Yeah.
And there's so many other great directors on this season. Deborah Chow, Bryce Dallas Howard, as we just mentioned. Taika Waititi has an episode in this season. And there's so much to look forward to with 4 episodes left. So really interested to see where this goes and revisit this topic.
And I know they have confirmed a season 2.
Yeah.
So we sort of feel safe about the Mandalorian's fate. We still don't know how the plot is going to wrap up, but I think it's just been so encouraging for other Star Wars properties that are going to hit Disney Plus to see, like, you know, they're really committing to making this as good a product as possible. And I think that, you know, we got episode 3 was directed by Deborah Chow. She's directing all the episodes of Kenobi, and you kind of see like, okay, here's her work on Star Wars. You know, you love it. Now we can watch Kenobi with Ewan, who you also know you love. So like, it just has served to get me to keep me excited about these new Star Wars properties that are going to pop up on Disney Plus. And it came out at sort of the perfect time because you have The Mandalorian and you have Jedi Fallen Order, and Rise of Skywalker comes out towards the end of the month. So Disney did a really good job of sort of like making this like a couple month long process of getting really excited about Star Wars. Yeah. And I don't necessarily think they needed that. I think that people are going to get excited about Star Wars no matter what anybody says.
Right.
But I think it's been a very concerted effort. Galaxy's Edge opened up very recently too, in Disneyland and Disney World in Orlando. I think they've been doing a really good job of, you know, keeping Star Wars in the zeitgeist, keeping everybody talking about Star Wars, and I think that's probably going to peak with Rise of Skywalker.
Yeah, God, you said Rise of Skywalker comes out towards the end of this month. My heart dropped.
Yeah.
All right, so that wraps up episode 8.
Yep.
Thank you for listening and thank you for watching. You can find us on Spotify, on YouTube, anywhere you get your podcasts at Chatting Cinema. I'm Gianni.
I'm Flynn. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you, as always, to SSTV for allowing us to use the equipment, and we'll see you on the next episode.